The Choircast podcast is brought to you by The Edge of the Inside by Jeremy Jernigan. I wrote this book about my journey leaving my dream job as a multi-site megachurch pastor in 2020 and how I learned to see both the church and God differently from the edge. If you've ever felt like the Christianity you were handed doesn't match with the Jesus you read about, this book is for you. It's available now on Amazon.
Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast. I'm Jeremy, and I am here with Dr. Meredith High Estevez. She is a Juilliard-trained musician, very impressive. Also, writer and creator, and creative coach who helps people reconnect with their creativity as a spiritual practice. She's got a book coming out in July, Art is How God Loves Us. It reframes art not as like decoration or performance, but as a primary way divine love is expressed and encountered in everyday life. Dr. Estevez, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Well, I grew up in rural South Carolina, outside of the Greenville-Spartanburg area. I was born to a mom who was my librarian in elementary school and a dad who was an attorney. And so I knew that I was creative since I was a young kid and loved being in the community theater productions and playing music, and was able to attend a boarding school for the arts for my junior and senior years of high school. And that was really where I learned about how much training and skill goes into classical music performance. And I was a kid who really loved learning and loved expressing herself through music. And I mentioned this education piece because it started that early for me, that I knew that if I wanted to be a great musician, I had to give everything I had to my technique and my skill and my practice. So I traded in my wonder and joy for music at a really early age for some intense training as an oboist. And so after 12 years of college in music, including an Ivy League degree and a degree from the Juilliard School with a doctorate in music from Juilliard, I realized that as I was standing on 65th Street with my Juilliard diploma, smiling for my dad's camera phone, I realized that I had completely lost my joy for my work. And even though I had grown up as I had been a Christian all my life, I grew up in the United Methodist tradition, I had really disconnected my faith from the work that I was doing on stage. And instead, my music performance had become a way for me to prove my worthiness. And, I write about in the book how I was just really searching for some atta-girl that would help me feel loved and valid. And so I started writing about that in 2020 during COVID when everything shut down. I had some space to write when I was taking a break from performing. And I started a podcast and published my first book. And so I really have been on this creative recovery journey for the last, almost 20 years now since I graduated and got through college. So.
Wow, that is fascinating. So tell me about, like, when you were growing up, you said you sort of lost the connection because I guess obviously you got very serious about music, but what was your experience of that connection when you were younger, right? What connected the spirituality and the art?
Yeah, for me, it was this sense of possibility and hope. Mm-hmm. There's a quote that I of a painter, Gerhard Richter. He said, "Art is the highest form of hope." Yeah. And I really felt that as a kid when I was lying on the floor in my bedroom listening to Aaron Copland's Appalachian Spring, which is one of my all-time favorite orchestral settings of that tune. And I just, that, in that piece, there's these open chords and this just like beautiful symphonic timbre. I wanted to be able to know, I wanted to inhabit, even as a kid, 11 or 12 years old, I wanted to inhabit that music and to understand what made it great. And I sensed God's love and joy and hope in that music. I felt closest to God when I was listening and playing and singing on stage. And I felt my own belovedness and the love that God has for the world through creation.
Yeah. Wow. And what did that feel like? I think a lot of people will hear people say those kinds of things. And then they're like, what? How do I know if like, that's the thing I'm feeling? Like, what's that feel like internally?
Well, in my body, it felt like butterflies in my stomach or tears in my eyes or goosebumps.
Oh, wow.
Those moments where something is deeply touched or moved in me that I can't quite put into words. And the new book, Art is How God Loves Us, is actually, it started because I kept writing down these experiences I had with music from childhood to adulthood, and not just music, but sculptures and paintings and sunsets and rivers. And I started sort of collecting these stories, not only of my own, but of writers like Anne Lamott and Sarah Bessey.
Yeah.
And people I really respect. Like, people are having encounters with God through art. And I want to study that, almost like you are asking me this now. Like, what is that? And what's that about?
Yeah.
And what do you feel like? I got curious about it too. And so I dove deep into that topic for the new book.
Yeah. So tell me, in this book, this is something that feels like very abstract or subjective, right? How do you deal with that issue of like the abstractness, the subjectivity when you're writing about this for, the average person?
Well, I know the kind of conversations I want to have about faith online and in my courses, and I lead workshops around Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way.
Oh, yeah. I know that book.
Yeah, it's one of the top selling self-help books of all time. It really invited people in. It was one of the most profound impacts on me that had on me when I was working to overcome my creative block. And so the kind of conversations we were having in 2017 and 2020 around this book, we were talking about faith, but it was always in this open, broad, invitational way that allowed somebody, if they weren't comfortable using the word God, to use the word universe or use whatever word. Art was a place that we could come together and talk about faith, even though we were different. It was because we were all artists and we were willing to claim that title. We found a common ground to talk about faith. And that was actually so surprising to me as a facilitator. I was really nervous about, what if we don't agree, and what if it's not okay? And I have found that the arts have been a place where people can find common ground to talk about things that are bigger than us, that we don't have words for.
Right.
And so I think we all get to have our opinions about everything, but I feel like it's easier to talk about our opinions about art than our opinions about God.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. You'll be labeled a heretic very quickly when you start talking about God. That's fascinating. And it is so much easier to talk about our experiences, our subjective ideas about art. So I'd love for you to say a little bit about, I think a lot of people are, enjoy art, are sort of consumers of art. I live in the DC area. One of my favorite things is to go to the American Gallery of Art. There's the classic art and the modern art buildings. But I also love music. Right now, I'm currently obsessed with Troye Sivan and I just lost her name. She has got red hair and she dresses in drag. But But I think there is this like consuming art, this experiencing art. Chapel Roan, sorry, I have
Yes.
ADD. Just, anyway. So there's this like consuming art, this experiencing art. But what's the difference between that and encountering something spiritual through it?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question and an important question, because I think this is related actually to the whole Timothy Chalamet fight. Did you hear about this where he?
Oh, yeah. Well, for those people who are not familiar, who do not have the tea on Timothy Chalamet, give us a little overview.
So yes, basically he said in an interview that the arts are declining, and that basically he threw some shade at ballet and opera. And that those art
and
forms.
it's his mom, right? One of his relatives is like a professional dancer.
Oh, okay. Wow, I didn't know that. I bet they feel very sad about his comment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I disagree with the way he went about saying that, but
Right.
I think there is something there around consumption. What you were saying about we try to turn art into content, right?
Right.
We're tempted to just consume. We use words like binge watch, and it's
Mhm.
and have these phones where we just can swipe, and we don't think about the artists behind the work that's being made, and the lives that go into the shared stories and the importance of their dignity. But I think that the crisis, the decline of the arts, quote unquote, if we want to call it that, if we want to name it
Right.
that, it's a well-being crisis. It's a spiritual crisis, because
Okay.
when we see Chapel Roan or Beethoven or Mozart or whatever,
Mhm.
when we see that as like God speaking to us through this music, when we see the invitation of how what the Snowmass, I don't know if you read about this, but Father John Keating brought all of these spiritual leaders together in Snowmass, Colorado, Buddhist, Hindu, Native American. I mean, they all came together and they meditated together, and they
Yeah.
said, okay, so like, what do we believe? Like, what can we agree on about spiritual experience?
Right.
And the one I zero in on in the book is when they say ultimate reality, which is what they call spiritual connection, can be experienced through nature and through created art.
Yeah.
And so I think when we miss out on the spiritual invitation of creativity and art viewing, we might be tempted to turn it into consumption.
Right.
And we might miss some of that potential joy. And I'm not here to yuck your yums about consuming art. I think that's great
Fair.
too. But I do think that when we go, maybe the secret to solving the decline of the arts problem is to invite people not to understand art or to solve it, but to inhabit it, to get to invite them into a conversation, to listen for what they hear, right? And so there's no right answer. It's truly a personal spiritual experience.
Yeah. So, okay, you talked there a little bit about consuming art and then but then sort of contrast that with this different way of approaching it. So, I mean, it just brings me to the obvious question, like, how do you do that? Right? What is it that we do to enter into art or an experience of art with this spiritual orientation?
Well, I don't want to be that author who says, buy my book, but.
Well, of course. I mean, obviously, buy your book. It's not out till July. So until then, until we get the fully formed thing.
I wanted to include something.
What's the first step?
To answer that, to be practical in that, because yes, you're right. Like, how do we shift, especially for artists and creative people who have all the training and all the baggage around that, not only just creation, but I mean, I struggled after I left Juilliard. I couldn't even go to concerts. Like, I didn't enjoy classical music or, attending it at all. And so I think the first step is to find the thing that in a particular moment can meet you where you are.
Mhm.
And to just sit in the presence of it, almost like an act of devotion. Devote
Okay.
yourself to listening to Chapel Roan with
Yes.
with a spiritual invitation of, there's an exercise in the book called Let Art Be Light,
Mhm.
where you name a challenge or a question you have, and
Yeah.
then you put on a piece of music, or you view a sculpture, or you look out your window and you ask yourself, okay, what is God teaching me? Or if God's not a good word for you, what is spirit or what is universe telling me right now about this challenge through this created thing?
Yeah.
And just listen.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. That pattern is actually present throughout spirituality, that way of entering in, right? This idea of setting an intention, setting this this sort of spiritual goal, not this, I think sometimes it can be difficult when, especially for people who are not practiced in all of this, to just be like, I'm going to experience this spiritually, right? Because like what you're talking about, it gives direction, it gives framing, and to that experience, and it makes me think of there's a couple of moments in the Bible. There's this part in the first chapter of Romans where it says, since the beginning of the world, God has been communicating to humanity through all the things that God created. And nobody can give an excuse to say, like, I didn't know God. Right. And the other thing, which I think is interesting, because when I go back to the beginning, the creation stories in the book of Genesis, one of the key theological points is that at the core of who humanity is, like at the very center, is this image of God, that somehow the creator, when we were created, part of who we are is God, right? And in the framing of that story, right, the story of creation, the obvious implication of that is that inside each of us is this image of God, and that story is showing God as creator. So there is this deep divine impulse, calling to create, that is core to humanity. And I wonder, for you, as a creator, as an artist, if you experienced art, this sort of spiritual experience of art, differently when you are creating versus when you are just sort of in the presence of it.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that my relationship to creating and the challenges I had there around self-worth and doubt and inner critic stuff, that actually prohibited me from experiencing God in the creating and the creation. And so I wrote this book for artists, but also anybody who wants to think about art as a spiritual practice. Right. Because I think that, we often, I give a new definition for art, because we all have baggage around like what is art, and, the whole, it's not good enough, or you can't be in a museum, or you're not in the right style or whatever. And instead of art as being this like skilled experience, I decided to use art as an acronym to stand for atoms responding to transcendence.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, and so that's really cool.
Every time we go to make art, we're just working with atoms that already exist, and the transcendence is the thing that makes the art. It's not us. We just get to move the atoms around, like we're ordering the chaos, like God at creation.
Yeah.
And so that really helped me see not only art viewing, which in some ways as a kid was the easiest thing to feel God's presence, but to feel it again in creative practice.
So I'd like to sort of get a little story from you.
Sure.
Can you tell us, because I think my experience is that as we're trying to figure out who we are, as we're trying to like engage in practices like this, it's often hearing the story of someone else that helps us process and enter into that. So I'd love to hear a story of a time where you had a spiritual experience with art, what that experience was like, what the art was, and maybe what you heard, what you came out of it with.
Sure. Wow. I'm having trouble picking one, but I will tell you one about a really surprising one, honestly.
Okay.
I was in labor with my second child, and labor was as expected, horrible and beautiful. And I'll start this by saying there's going to be a little bit of a birth trauma in here, but you should know in the end, everything, by God's grace, worked out okay. But it was one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life that took me 4 years to write about. And when I finally got it out on my son's 4th birthday, it was just such a hugely cathartic experience. So I'm practicing talking about it. And the essay's in the book. So like, I'm going to talk about it. But basically what happened was during labor, before I had any medications, I experienced euphoria, which happens to a very small percentage of women who are in labor, where amidst the pain of labor, you also experience like intense euphoric feelings. Okay? And while this was happening, this was brought on by a piece by a living Estonian composer called Arvo Pärt. And he is an Orthodox Estonian who writes about contemplative faith. And this piece is called Spiegel im Spiegel, which means mirror in a mirror. And so and listen to it later, but it's a violin and piano piece that I had on my birth playlist. And as soon as this song came on during labor, I had this experience of euphoria. And all I can say is that God's love entered the room. I mean, it was like tears. It was just the most amazing experience ever. And in that moment, I saw, quote unquote, you know how you do when you have spiritual moments. I saw my daughter going off to college. I was experiencing like the joy and the grief all at once of like letting my daughter go.
Yeah.
And the music, it's about an 8-minute piece. And for the entirety of that piece, I had this experience of being near to God's love, almost to the point where I was like, make it stop. I mean, it was like that, like, I can't take this. I mean, in the, Teresa of Avila uses the word ecstasy. And that was it. It was this like ultimate experience of joy and pleasure and grief. And I mean, all at once.
Wow.
And so that music, you can perform that piece on oboe. And so sometimes I play it on recitals, and I have to sort of prepare myself mentally to like get in them. And it's also very difficult. But I tell you this story because a couple hours later, I had a seizure during labor.
Oh, wow.
And I went unconscious, and we almost lost my son. And it was unclear as to, what was going on. I got rushed out, and it was this hugely traumatic experience. And I really felt like that birth experience of euphoria and meeting God there was like a gift that I needed and the music was like the thread, like the thin place of the two worlds coming together that allowed me to gave me the fortitude to fight and to stay alive and to, get through that horribly traumatic experience of childbirth. So,
wow.
Yeah, that's just
wow. Well, Dr. Estevez, thank you so much for being here and for this book, Art is How God Loves Us, coming out in July. You should check it out, pre-order it. It's going to be available everywhere. But where else can they find you and your work?
Thank you so much. Yes, I have a bi-monthly podcast called Artists for Joy, and it is on all the places where you can get podcasts, where we talk about creative coaching and finding joy in the creative life. And I also write about art and faith every other week on my Substack, which is called Art's Open Door. And so I hang out there and on Instagram at Artists for Joy.
Thank you so much. If you are looking for a place to process spirituality with all kinds of people who have all kinds of different spiritual identities and non-identities, Buddhists and atheists and Christians, we've got that. It's called Not Church. People say it's like church, except nobody is judging them because they've got a tarot deck on their bedside table. If you're interested in something like that, go to patreon.com/skeptic pastor. That's patreon.com/skeptic pastor. And I'll see you there. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.